Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are about to begin our book launch titled How Pakistan Got Divided by Major General Rao Farman Ali. The session will be moderated by Ghazi Salahuddin. Ghazi Salahuddin Saab is a senior journalist, writer, literary figure and political analyst. He was given the Bibliophile of the Year award by the National Book Foundation in 2011. He also served as president of the Karachi Press Club in 2006. The guest speakers are Ilhan Niaz, scholar and author, presently based in Islamabad, where he is assistant professor of history at the Quaid-e-Azam University. Aqila Ismail has written extensively on literature, women's issues, and the development concerns of Karachi. Yes, please. At present, she is working on a book on the life and work of her sister, Parveen Rahman. Shafiqur Rahman Saab is Rao Farman Ali Khan's son. He was 21 years old at the time of the great East Pakistan tragedy. The 1971 events left a deep impression on him as he and his family experienced personal and national loss of East Pakistan. Zafar Ilali Saab is senior diplomat and retired foreign service professional. He is well known as a political analyst and commentator on current affairs, especially concerning the international dimension of issues. Hilali Saab holds an LLB from King's College, London. May we begin the session, please? Thank you.
ये कह रहे हैं कि ईस्ट पाकिस्तान के बारे में कुछ ना कहें तो इसलिए बंद किया हुआ था. But let's begin this discussion. Let me at the outset say that this may perhaps be the most important book launch in Karachi Literature Festival this year. One reason is that there is this focus on 70 years of Pakistan, and that is partition. But there was another partition in 1971 that usually we don't talk much about. But here is this book that we are launching, How Pakistan Got Divided. हाँ, ठीक है, अब तो मेरे ख्याल में हाँ आवाज़ जा रही है हर तरफ. So, How Pakistan Got Divided, written by someone who was right there in the midst of it. Major General Rao Farman Ali was there, and in that sense he was a participant observer. And in this book he has been very candid. He has detailed the whole incidents. He had access to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He was looking after the civilian affairs at the time. And there are some revelations also here. Even though the book had been published in 1992, I'm sure if you read it, it'll be something like something you would be introduced to a new version of what happened. Now, as we proceed, and I ask my panelists to give their views, I think we should keep this session bilingual also, so that we can express ourselves more freely at times. And I know all of us usually in our conversations are bilingual. To begin, Mr. Shafiqur Rahman being the author's son, I am sure feels very deeply about the book and about how it should be reviewed. and he has brought a small statement. So that would be a very appropriate launching for this discussion. So please.
Thank you. Salahuddin Sahib, members of the panel, and brothers and sisters. I'm honored to be on this panel of distinguished intellectuals and writers. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate and listen in on this discussion on how Pakistan got divided. The dismemberment of Pakistan is a great tragedy of our time. Certainly the greatest tragedy of my time and for many others in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. It is a great tragedy that made even greater by the fact that it could have been easily prevented had wisdom prevailed over passion and the quest for power at any cost, even to the detriment of the national interest, curtailed. For me and for many others, losing East Pakistan is like losing a childhood friend, lost in an accident, and then lost in an accident that one loved the friend and still craves for him. By turning back the cruel hand of time, it really is not possible. In writing this book and the family effort in getting this reprinted, my father's hope was that we would learn from the mistakes of the past and never to repeat them again. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shafiqur Rahman Sahab. The problem here is there are so many things that are involved in that great tragedy. And it will be difficult to sort of keep things within certain bounds. So let us begin with an academic analysis of what this book is about. And for that, I would request Ilhan Niaz, who's such a distinguished scholar, to, in a way, sum up the book before we proceed with.
Thank you so much, Ghazi Saab. And normally when people hear the words academic analysis, they may think it's time to go to sleep, but I'll try to keep everyone awake. This is a very interesting and a very remarkable book as an academic historian from my perspective, because of three major features, three major characteristics of this particular volume. The first is that when we typically think about participant-observer narratives, these narratives often lack objectivity. And this is understandable because the individual concerned is involved in certain decisions, they are involved in certain things, and naturally as a participant, perhaps they are not as objective as a later analyst, more remote from that time can be. But as far as participant-observer accounts go, I found the book How Pakistan Got Divided to be remarkably objective, written in a very stoic, matter-of-fact manner about what went on during those very dark and very difficult times in the history of our country. In his analysis, the author, General Saab, does not, sorry, is this working? In his analysis, the author does not spare anybody, least of all the military. Oh, thank you. He does not spare anybody, including the military. He lays bare what he feels to have been the failure of the military government. Of course, Yahya Khan was then Pakistan's ruler and must bear the brunt of the responsibility for the decisions that were made or the wiser decisions that could have been made but were not made. So in that sense, this particular analysis really focuses upon the responsibility which the then military government bore in terms of failing to manage the crisis properly, in terms of making certain fundamental mistakes. One of those mistakes, for example, being that when the LFO was being promulgated, it did not give enough time for a proper compromise to be worked out once a constituent assembly had been convened. And the doing away with of the interwing parity, another important decision which the then military ruler made, all of these sort of set the stage for a situation in which later political compromise would have been very difficult. And here, of course, the author is also unsparing in his criticism of the leaders of the two main political parties at that time, the Pakistan's People's Party, led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who had secured a substantial majority in the west of the country, and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman of the Awami League, who had secured a huge majority, reference East Pakistan. And one of the things that the author basically feels is that in a way, you had two prime ministers for one country. And the political interest to compromise was perhaps lacking, and perhaps the politicians preferred to have two countries for two prime ministers. At any rate, his analysis of what went on is one which is very interesting. The other thing is, of course, that the book contains many valuable insights into the military situation and into the military planning that took place in the run-up to the war with India that then led to the creation of Bangladesh and the secession of East Pakistan. The interesting thing is that in the book, the author talks about how he had himself proposed that Pakistan needed to come up with an operational doctrine for an independent defense of East Pakistan. And what is remarkable is that even after the 1965 war, the military high command remained wedded to the orthodoxy that the defense of the East lay in the West, remained wedded to the idea that a vigorous counterattack upon India in the northwestern border of India by Pakistan could somehow prevent the Indians from undertaking military action against East Pakistan. And in this respect, even after the 1965 war, the military did not give up these ideas, and the author himself, who wanted to develop an independent operational strategy for the East, was then subsequently transferred to East Pakistan. So that then, you know, nobody else basically took up this task after him. Once the political crisis escalated into an attempt to suppress through military means the Awami League, again, the author is very crisp and very, I would say, searing at times in his criticism of the military leadership in East Pakistan, which he feels simply did not treat the East Pakistanis as citizens that were to be eventually reconciled, but maybe even looked at them as an imperial power would look upon a territory that it has conquered. And he gives lots of accounts of the kind of wishful thinking or boastfulness that prevailed in the military when it came to the issue of dealing with East Pakistan. And I'll quote from page 197 about what happened when the military tables were turned and it became apparent that Pakistan was going to lose. The author states, General Niazi had without any shadow of a doubt become unhinged. His conscience was not clear, and his actions had been less than pure. He feared his nemesis. He had lost all his vulgar humor and loud boasts. people saw him weep in his office as well. And he goes on to castigate the military more broadly as well, stating on page 221 that soldier types projected themselves as fighters, but many were merely boastful, unrealistic, unreasonable, and what is worse, failures in battle. The reason being that modern wars are conducted successfully by commanders with knowledge and understanding of the art of war. And the lack of knowledge and understanding of the art of war comes out very clearly in his analysis of the situation as far as the Pakistan side was concerned. The book also sheds light on some of the longer term causes of the secession of East Pakistan. And in this respect, these causes could be divided into a major internal cause and a major external cause. On the internal front, the political alienation of the East Pakistanis during military rule 1958 to 1969 under Ayub, and the sense of deprivation that it engendered was what basically got the disintegration process started. And one gets a sense from the author's view of the Ayub days and what was happening towards the end of the Ayub regime, that military rule had gravely weakened the federation. And it had, in effect, while producing slightly higher rates of economic growth, by disrupting the normal political process of give and take, led to a situation where the demands of the East Pakistanis escalated to a point where it became impossible to reconcile them perhaps through a later normal political process. And on the external front, India loomed very large, ever ready to exploit Pakistan's internal difficulties, self-inflicted though those may have been. And here, the Indian objective was very clear. That was to use whatever means necessary, both covert and overt mechanisms of violence, in order to bring about a change in the internationally recognized boundaries of a neighboring sovereign state. And this Indian policy, of course, neatly coincided with our own mismanagement of the situation in East Pakistan. And what it again basically shows is, because I mean yesterday in his inaugural remarks, the Indian High Commissioner made some perhaps inappropriate references, given that this is a literary festival inaugural, to Pakistan's alleged sponsorship of subversive activities in India. Well, you know, that's basically like the pot calling the kettle black. And this book brings out in detail what was going on with reference to the Indian involvement in the East Pakistan crisis, the military dimensions of that, and how that all unfolded. And in this respect, it's also a very valuable book to read in terms of understanding how the power politics of that period were playing out at the regional level. So on balance, it's a fine book. It's easy to read. It's packed with lots of details about what happened. And the republication of this book in Pakistan's 70th year is a timely contribution. And I hope that we learn from this book in order to avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilhan. The audience has certified your summing up being so compact and raising very different issues. Issues about civil military, issues about the role of the political parties, about the quality of military leadership, about the situation that had seemed unmanageable, and many other questions could be raised. I remember Jio had, in its initial years, when television used to be a bit better than what it's now, had done in the month of December a series of programs about why we lost East Pakistan. And I remember we did 7 episodes in 50 minutes. And there was the issue still was left not fully covered, because there are so many questions that arise. But there is general impression, and I think you will agree with it, that even though we have this book, and even though there has been other published material, other books, but generally we seem to be in denial when it comes to the loss of East Pakistan. In our textbooks, they don't much mention it. They just gloss over it in a few sentences. We don't much talk about it. We talk a lot about partition, about why Pakistan came into being, and Jinnah's role and his speeches. But the big question of what happened to us because of the loss of East Pakistan has not yet been fully explored. And I think this book should help us answer some of these questions, to probe some of these questions. And we have on my left now, Aqila Ismail, would you look at the book in terms of your own personal feelings and involvement?
Thank you, Ghazi. The analysis that you just heard exemplifies why historians should not look at tragedies. He looked at it in such a cold, incompassionate manner rather. The only thing that historians get right are the dates and people. They do not see what happens to humanity in terms of war. And so, historians should learn to transcend dates and time, and they should look at what happened to the people there, what transpired. Now, I'm not just a witness, I'm also a survivor of what happened during those days. I was a university student, a first-year university student, a student of the university that was attacked on 25th of March, which is talked about in this book in a very cold manner. And I tell you, that was like attacking a foreign country. The whole, it was tanks, you had guns, and you were attacking students. So that whole night, the tragedy that took place is actually that tragedy, where the army attacks its own people. So that was one aspect of it, and I don't think it has been covered very adequately in this book. The second part, in which I think the author was directly complicit, or rather the perception of his being complicit, although he does try to give reasons why certain things happened. But those reasons are mostly verbal, that he said this to somebody and said that to somebody. But the perception in East Pakistan at that time, and I'm a witness, was that General Rao was calling the shots. And one of the major aspects of his tenure during the 9 months of tragedy was that in May, he made the Devil's Pact with the Jamaat-e-Islami, and that created the Al-Badr and Al-Shams Brigade, which wreaked havoc among the populace of the country. And they were Bengalis, some who were not Bengalis, some were Urdu speaking like I was, but they did. And the third thing that the author of the book is perceived to have done, and this is a perception that still is very alive there, and that is when on the 14th of December, just a couple of days before the surrender, when I think he was the advisor to the governor, Governor Malik, there was a list, there was the murder, brutal murder of intellectuals that took place. I have 4 friends who lost their fathers in that massacre of the intellectuals, and it is said that there was a complicity of the general in that. And that persists, those perceptions have not been dealt with in this book. So while we are probably expected to look at the East Pakistan / Bangladesh imbroglio during 1971, 70, 71, 72, through the prism of this book, but I think you have to look beyond that. This book only lays out what General Farman's, let us say his conversations were with General Niazi, etc., and how he at every stage, he says, tried to mitigate what was happening. But I think the best way to have mitigated it at that time and to have probably stopped a senseless killing of so many innocent people would have been what Zafar Hilali Saab's father did. He resigned. Agha Hilali Saab resigned instead of being complicit. So you go through the whole process. You become governor, you become advisor, you are the general up there in front, and then you say, I tried to mitigate it. It doesn't hold much water. So there were atrocities committed, and let me tell you that in this book he says that there was no genocide. It was just a certain number of people killed. Now I think that's a very obscene way of looking at people's lives. Okay, so maybe 30,000 were not killed, 26,000 were killed. That doesn't make it less of a tragedy. So to count the numbers who are killed, I think is a very obscene way of looking at tragedies. So that is another fault of the book, that you should not have looked at numbers. On the morning of 26th of December, there were bodies strewn in Dhaka. They were bodies of my own class fellows as well as others. Ittifaq, the leading newspaper, their office was also attacked. So there were journalists killed. And the dispute is that no, 10,000 were not killed, 250 were killed. Is this any less of a tragedy? So, we must not look at it from body counts, but we must look at it all the lives that were totally devastated. The lives of the Bengalis who were devastated, the lives of those who were not Bengalis like me, which was devastated because we were totally dispossessed. And the murder of intellectuals that took place. And so the book does not offer me any comfort. There is no comfort in the book. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Aqila Ismail.
I can go on, but let Zafar Saab speak.
Another participant observer in a context. Shafiq Sahab would want to respond to her, but before we come to that, we have one person who should be most qualified to give an overview of what happened and most qualified to be able to review this book because he has been a diplomat and must have been involved in some manner with what happened and what happened after that. So Zafar Hilali has also, I can see sheets of paper in his hands and he has been taking notes of, but let's have him for 7 or 8 minutes. Okay.
Well, thank you. Hello. I think you'd agree with me that a coffee, a cigarette and a stretch takes about 10 minutes. And here we have to review a whole book in 8 minutes. What do you think of that?
I wish we could sit here and talk until tomorrow morning.
Well, I'll do as commanded, but let me pass on a few vignettes of the East Pakistan saga, which I personally experienced, in case some future history buff writing about events takes that into account or feels it's relevant. First, the book. It was a good read, absorbing, intriguing, and what made it more so are the many what-ifs it alludes to. I also felt about it, there was a certain ring of truth about the book, and a fairly accurate account, I muttered to myself, of what must have transpired. Indeed, as the author points out, while the two wings of Pakistan did come together to form a state in 1947, the moral and cultural union needed to transform a state into a nation never occurred. One reason General Farman Ali suggests was distance. Others say it was language and culture. But frankly, I don't think it was either. Subcontinental language and cultures may differ from each other as much as chalk and cheese. But the Makrani and the Chitrali nevertheless live within Pakistan peacefully. And so do within India the folks from Kerala with the Sikkimese, even if in terms of distance they may as well be on a different continent. In my view, the reasons for the two wings of Pakistan not to gel was because in this world, I believe, there are two kinds of states. There are historical states and non-historical states. The former consist of one preponderant ethnic group, like say the Han Chinese. And regardless of who and how they are ruled, these, whether by a sadist like Mao or a drunk like Yeltsin, there will always be a China and a Russia. On the other hand, non-historical states are the outcome of wars and colonialism. They depend for their survival on the wisdom of their leaders. Unwise leaders means they perish or eventually will, like Yugoslavia and the USSR did, and Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and Iraq are in the process of doing. Today, Pakistan, Bharat, repeat, today Pakistan, Bharat, Nigeria, Israel, etc. are among several dozen non-historical states that could suffer the same fate as Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. In fact, about Pakistan, I am reminded of what was said about the founders of modern Italy, that having created Italy, they forgot to create Italians. General Farman Ali feels the disaster occurred because the main protagonists, namely Bhutto, Mujib and Yahya, especially the former two, only considered their personal betterment and not that of the country. Nowhere does he state unequivocally that Bhutto was aiming to undo Pakistan. In other words, the division of Pakistan may have been the unintended consequence of Bhutto's inability to agree with Mujib on a common course of action, but breaking Pakistan was never his goal. I too was of the same view till I heard the contrary from the horse's mouth, so to speak. That happened in early 1972, when in response to my remark that the East Pakistan tragedy was entirely avoidable, J. Rahim, at the time Bhutto's Minister for Production and the PPP's chief strategist and ideologue, remarked, "No, no, young man. We," by which I suppose he meant he and Bhutto, "worked hard to bring that about. We had decided that East Pakistan was a halter around our necks, and we could not have got anywhere lugging that stone around." My father was present during that conversation. I recall looking at him, shocked by Rahim's confession. My father averted my gaze, and for me, that gesture of his said it all. Later, when we were alone, I asked my father, "So what they say about the Bhutto's dirty role is true?" My father advised me to be careful what I say, because, as he said, Bhutto is a vindictive man. Why then did General Farman Ali not spot Bhutto's strategy? How could an otherwise acute observer and a regime insider have missed it? I suspect he held back because he never actually heard Bhutto or Rahim confess to it. And short of such a confession, he must have thought to insinuate that Bhutto wanted a division would be wrong. As fate would have it, I was deputed by the Foreign Secretary a couple of years later to take the minutes of Bhutto's meeting with heads of state and government invited to the Lahore Islamic Summit in 1974. Mujib derived, among much speculation, that Pakistan's two wings would reunite. I hung around to record their conversation, but I was not called in when they finally met on a one-to-one session. One of the few occasions during the summit, I should add, that a Foreign Office man was not present to take the minutes of meetings. My second vignette about the East Pakistan saga concerned my father. In early 1971, Agha Hilali, then our ambassador in Washington, was asked by Yahya to go to Dhaka, and a military helicopter was put at his disposal, flown by a young major called Ikram Sehgal. Is he here today?
I don't see him.
Ikram. No. Agha Hilali had been tasked to report on the situation to Yahya personally. On his return to Washington, my father sent the following telegram to Yahya. By the way, I came across this telegram on the archives of the Foreign Office only because I was tasked to write a white paper on India-Pakistan relations along with Yusuf Bach, and we had the freedom of the archives. My father had written, Mr. President, I will not be worth the salt of my country if I do not inform you what you are doing in East Pakistan is wrong. There is no military solution to a political question. It seems my father, General Farman Ali, too, by then, saw the writing on the wall for a united Pakistan. He writes that having been created, Farman Ali writes that having been created by the ballot, he could see Pakistan being undone by the same process, and that he was prepared to do anything to stop it. Basically, what did that mean? It meant fiddling with the elections? I don't think that was honorable. Anyway, I can see where he came from. Elsewhere, General Farman Ali writes that Sahibzada Yaqut Khan resigned his commission when GOC Dhaka because his advice to Yahya to visit Dhaka was rejected. Others say that Yahya developed cold feet. Others say that Yaqub developed cold feet when he saw the charged crowds Mujib was drawing and resigned rather than take them on. In 1979, I had the opportunity to ask Yaqub his version of events. I was the political counselor in Washington during Yaqub's tenure. Yaqub denied all such assertions. As for cold feet, he laughed and said that he had all along been for, this is interesting, he had been for military action as early as 1970 to restore order and the army's fiat, but that Yahya had refused. Thereafter, he had resigned because it was too late for such a move. To conclude, and I'm finishing, to conclude, though General Farman Ali's book is an invaluable addition to literature on the subject, there is a lot we still need to know about that debacle. Nevertheless, we owe his sons our gratitude for publishing such a well-worded account of his father's effort. I hope all of you get time to read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, every statement, every observation raises more questions and creates a different kind of interpretation. The title of this book, How Pakistan Got Divided, is an assertive statement. But think of it after putting a question mark, how Pakistan was divided. And that is what I think would be more relevant. The question mark remains. You were wanting to...
Yes, I did want to respond because I think...
But just a few sentences, because then it will go in another direction.
Okay. Basically, you know, if you look at his role, and I know him as a human being, and people that have worked with him know him, what a kind-hearted man he was. It is impossible for him to have done any of the things that he is accused of. In addition to that, the Hamoodur Rahman Commission investigated whatever was said about him and exonerated him. The DMI of the Indian Army actually talked to him and came back after his talk and investigated it and saluted him, saying there's nothing more to ask. So,
no, I don't think the idea was to question the human qualities of any individual there.
I understand, but I've already said it was a great tragedy, and for me it hurts even today.
There are
to think about
painful.
It.
There are very painful memories
on both sides.
On both sides, on every side, and I think it was something that has to be explored. There are many aspects that came later. Zafar Hilali Sahab may have read the blood telegram. Are you aware of that? And there is no hint of the American involvement in the whole thing in this book. But of course, that may not be something.
The American, as you know, precisely the moment that East Pakistan was coming to the fore, our initiative with China.
Yes.
And there were 4 people concerned with our initiative in China, including one of them, Kissinger, Nixon, the Chinese, and my father, because he was the kind of emissary. And Nixon went out of his way. For his own good reasons, but he went out of his way to reassure Yahya and to moderate Indira.
And as for the observation that it could be inevitable, or could someone do something about it, in this book, Rauf Farman went to East Pakistan in 67.
Yeah, 67.
And saw the situation there, and he has written that we had almost lost East Pakistan because of the public opinion, because of the feelings that he encountered there. So I was just shown the warning.
May I make a statement, please? Can I say something?
Sure.
Yes. You know, we've talked about all the aspects, and Rauf Farman Sahab's daughter, Shaheen, was my class fellow, 68 and 69. So it's not that Farman Sahab was not aware of what was going to happen or what did happen there, because he was among the populace. And my question is that knowing all this, he remained in top positions. He remained in positions where he could have prevented, yet he did not. And in this book, he offers explanations for those, but those explanations sort of don't gel. And, you know, so that is one aspect that you have to, that has to be addressed. That why did he not take a stand? Was it so impossible in the army to take a stand when the army was killing its own people? I mean, those are questions that have to be answered by someone.
But the issue of...
Yes.
It is a very emotive issue, but any one person's acts could not have perhaps changed the whole situation or the possible outcomes. Would it be a different military outcome if Niazi had not been there?
It's hard to speculate as far as I'm concerned.
But
let me answer that question about, you know, whether or not or how he could have influenced. I think people can influence things from within than from without. He already saw that there were things that were going wrong. He did his counsel, he met with the president, he said whatever he possibly could, including what was happening, but the president himself wanting to have the base, his political base in West Pakistan. So that decision was taken somewhere when he met with Bhutto, and Bhutto and the president were working together for whatever aim that they thought of.
When you say Bhutto and the president, you mean Bhutto and army?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the army. I wouldn't say that. You see, what happens is decisions that are taken at the top because the way the army behaves,
Okay.
the army has to carry out, otherwise there would be rebellion in every company, in every battalion, in every division.
Well,
if I may just
we don't
quietly quickly add something. How is it that your father did not get what Bhutto's game was? Look, Bhutto headed a party. Bhutto headed a majority party in West Pakistan. On the basis of one man, one vote, there was no question that he could never have come to power. Bhutto, I'm talking about Bhutto. And it was in his interest. How else would you get the army out of politics in Pakistan? Defeat. That would make sure that the army didn't stay in politics in Pakistan. How else would you make sure that the majority, how else would you make sure that the majority, the man who won the majority in Pakistan, would not get to be Prime Minister of Pakistan? Again,
Please.
separation.
Let's.
One little thing about numbers. Mr. Niaz, Ilhan Niaz Saab said that he won a substantial majority. No. Bhutto got only 80 seats in the National Assembly, and 300 seats were won by Sheikh Mujib. So there was no overwhelming factor in
West Pakistan. In West.
I mean, that means that you've already decided to divide
many arguments would be raised in that kind of
But Rahim told this to, I mean, I heard it with these ears.
No, Bhutto had no representation in East Pakistan.
Yeah.
Mujib had nothing in
So
West
that
Pakistan.
means you have to get rid of Mujib.
Factors, but we have less than 15 minutes and hands are still, I've seen hands being raised. How do I do this? You have to correct something.
Yes.
Can you do it in 3 sentences, please? Get Naz Ikramullah the
Depends
mic.
on the length of the sentence also.
Excuse me, you said that Bhutto had 80%. Mujib had the NAP and he had the frontier with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, he had in West Pakistan.
Yes.
So don't say that he had nothing in
Nothing.
West Pakistan.
Awami League had nothing. Yes, alliance. जी, आप बताइए. अपना नाम बताइए और सवाल
My
बताइए.
name is, can I comment? Can I make a small comment?
Comment will make it very difficult for me to handle it.
चलें ठीक है, फिर then I'll leave it.
अगर सवाल है इनमें से किसी से और comment भी 3 जुमले, ये आज 3 जुमलों में काम करते हैं. चलिए.
Okay, brief comment. I'm Jennifer
हाँ, हाँ.
Mann's youngest daughter.
जी.
And thank you, Akila, for bringing up these questions because they faced us. Number one, my father was not on the army side. He was on the civilian side. For the last 2.5 years, he was the civil advisor to the governor, which is the civil government in East Pakistan. And then he was taking care of the civil affairs. That's number one. Number two, the anguish that we and he faced, you do not see it in his book, but his personal letters, and some of them have been printed in the book, show it. It is, even one life is too much, believe me. ऐसी बात नहीं है कि तकलीफ आपको सिर्फ है, हम सबको इसकी तकलीफ है बहुत ज़्यादा. That's something I want to add.
Using my powers as a moderator, can I ask someone from the audience to make a comment? General Naqvi, would you like to say something?
I don't think that's fair, Razi.
Nahi.
Sir, I am not a student of the 1971 situation as such, but I was a grown-up enough man to have experienced that as an observer. I'd like to say only one thing here, and that is that somebody who's inside the government doesn't always agree with everything that's going on in that government. He is only one person in that government. He is not the whole government. Doesn't matter how important a position he happens to occupy at that time. And such a person always is faced with one of two choices. Continue to be associated with the process and try and do the best he can to prevent the wrong thing happening or make the right thing happen. That's one choice. And the second choice is to quit. And Rauf Arman exercised a particular choice, which was to stay inside and try and get the government to do the right thing. He can be criticized for it,
चलें.
He can be criticized for it, but
Thank you.
I mean, that's what he did.
थैंक यू. देखें पीछे इतने बहुत से हाथ हैं. नहीं नाज आपकी तो बात हो गई ना. जी प्लीज़ आप अपना नाम बताइए. और
अब्दुल खालिक जुनेजो, पॉलिटिकल वर्कर. मैं आपकी से फ़ायदा उठाना चाहता हूँ बायलुंगल का, उर्दू में पूछता हूँ. एक छोटी सी मैं भी करेक्शन के सिलसिले में ऐड करूँगा कि उस वक्त वेस्ट पाकिस्तान नाम की कोई चीज़ नहीं थी. जो कहा जाता है कि भुट्टो को वेस्ट पाकिस्तान में अक्सरियत थी, उसको 2 सूबों में सिंध और पंजाब में थी. वेस्ट पाकिस्तान नाम की चीज़ नहीं थी. सवाल मेरे के 2 हिस्से हैं अगर मुमकिन लगे. एक पर्टेन्स अकीला इस्माइल से और दूसरा हिस्सा उसी का शफीक रहमान साहब से. एक कहा जाता है कि शेख मुजीबुर रहमान आखिरी वक्त तक अलहदगी नहीं चाहते थे, जबकि स्टेट का है कि वो पहले दिन से चाहता था. तो आप चूँकि वहाँ रही हैं, आपकी अपनी ऑब्जर्वेशन इस बारे में क्या है? दूसरा हिस्सा जो उनसे ऐसी सवाल का कि ज़हूरुल हसन भोपाली मौलाना नूरानी के साथ वहाँ गए थे मुज़ाकरात में. बाद में उन्होंने लिखा कि गुफ्तगू करते हुए शेख मुजीबुर रहमान ने मौलाना साहब से कहा कि मौलाना साहब आप जो कुछ कह रहे हैं कि अफ़ाम व तफ़हीम वो सही है, लेकिन मैं आपको बताऊं कि फ़ौज और मगरबी पाकिस्तान के एक सियासतदान के दरमियान फ़ैसला हो चुका है कि इक़्तिदार अवामी लीग को नहीं देना है. तो आपके वालिद ने इस हवाले से कोई ज़िक्र आपसे किया? ये 2 हिस्से हैं सवाल.
चलें, ये तो बहुत अच्छी बात है कि आपने सवाल किया. आप
देखिए, मैं यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ती थी उस ज़माने में, एंड जो पहली मर्तबा हमने देखा 3 मार्च को, जब पहली मार्च को असेंबली को पोस्टपोन किया गया, 3 मार्च को बांग्लादेश का फ्लैग रेज़ किया गया था आर्ट्स डिपार्टमेंट में यूनिवर्सिटी के, ढाका यूनिवर्सिटी के. तो वो पहला मौका था जब हमने बांग्लादेश का नाम सुना. उसके बाद जो शेख मुजीब का जो पहली मर्तबा जो उसने अलहदगी की बात की पब्लिकली, वो था 10 मार्च को, जब उसने कहा था कि दिस नाउ आवर स्ट्रगल इज़ अ स्ट्रगल फॉर लिबरेशन. सो अगर आप पब्लिकली देखें तो ये 2 चीज़ें हुई थी, मगर ये दोनों चीज़ें हुई थी असेंबली के सेशन के पोस्टपोनमेंट के बाद. तो शायद उसकी वजह से ये सब हुआ था. तो मेरा सिर्फ सवाल उस वक्त भी था और अब भी है कि अगर उस वक्त शेख मुजीब को, जो कि वो राइटफुली डिज़र्व करता था, प्राइम मिनिस्टर बना दिया जाता, तो क्या अभी हम बैठकर इसको बहस कर रहे होते कि बांग्लादेश क्यों बना?
आपसे भी उन्होंने कुछ पूछा था.
जी
नहीं, कोई सवाल आपके लिए भी था ना?
जी वो था, वो मैं ये कह रहा था कि मेरे वालिद का ये ख्याल था कि शेख मुजीबुर रहमान को अगर बनाते प्राइम मिनिस्टर तो वो अलहदगी ना चाहते.
जी
जी, आई एम सॉरी टू से, since the inception of Pakistan, we consider East Pakistan as a burden, as a burden, as a burden. And in fact, we want to get rid of East Pakistan. This is the fact. We have to go and trace the history. It's not very old. I am sorry to say.
Shukriya. Now we got a hint of how emotive this issue can be. जी, नाज आप.
This has nothing to do with what I said.
सवाल, अच्छा चलें.
Rahman Subhan was met with the People's Party, and my husband and I were allowed to sit in so long as we didn't say a word, which we didn't. And the People's Party came and they said, this is the sentences I remember, we would like to have, this is the elections have held, we would like to have Foreign Office and Defense. And Kamal Hussain said, but you will be Her Majesty's loyal opposition. How can you be, when they are the government, when we lose, if you have a vote against us, then you can do it. The discussion did not lead anywhere. They left, and that is what happened. There was bad intention.
एक वहाँ जो हाथ उठाए आप, जी बिल्कुल आप.
पीछे भी 2 हैं.
इतने हाथ हैं कि.
I am Zahoor. The fundamental question is political parties are being involved in the separation of East Pakistan. My fundamental question is, who has sworn to keep the country intact? Was the political leaders or the President of Pakistan, who then was also the Commander-in-Chief? Who is responsible to protect the integrity of Pakistan? Why blame the politicians? Number two, if I correctly remember, Rauf Farman Ali was the one who sent a ceasefire request to Security Council to arrange a ceasefire between India and Pakistan to the Security Council. Number three, the legal advisor to Yahya, Mr. Haq, he has written in his book that Mujibur Rahman did not want separation. He had suggested to Yahya that he should nominate 10 or 15 seats so that Mujibur Rahman makes sure that those candidates are defeated and there is no simple majority in East Pakistan to be able to enforce the will. This was a move against the Bengali fundamentalists. That request was declined by Yahya because his brother was the ISI, chairman of the ISI. That also I said.
शुक्रिया. एक ऑब्जर्वेशन थी. आप फातिमा कुछ कह रही हैं?
मैं भी ढाका यूनिवर्सिटी में थी और 16 दिसंबर को वहीं थी. तो अकीला ने जिस तकरीर का हवाला दिया उसके बाद शेख मुजीब ने पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद का नारा भी लगाया था. और दूसरी बात यह है कि एक सवाल मेरे जहन में है, उस वक्त से है कि उस रात जो इंटेलेक्चुअल्स और जर्नलिस्ट की किलिंग हुई थी उसका इल्ज़ाम भी राव फरमान अली पर जाता रहा है. क्या इसको एड्रेस किया है इस किताब में?
नहीं, इस किताब में उसका कोई जिक्र नहीं है.
नहीं जिक्र.
और हम हैं.
नहीं जिक्र नहीं, मगर एक बात मैं बताऊं कि देखिए सच्चाई जो भी हो, परसेप्शंस मैटर.
फिर आप
देखिए फैक्ट्स
जवाब साहब, उसके बाद फिर हमें इसे कंक्लूड करना पड़ेगा.
You cannot confuse facts with perception.
नहीं,
देखिए आप perception देखिए, मैं आपको बताऊं इराक वॉर में क्या हुआ. आपको इतने साल आपके बच्चों को.
Can I answer this question please, specifically to the intellectuals, to both of you? Yes, this was addressed in Hamoud Rahman Commission. He was exonerated. On 13th of December, Malik Saab had resigned. There had been a bombing and my father was no longer in power. And plus, Al-Badr and all were under the intelligentsia, not the civilian government.
Yes.
It has been covered.
But the point was whether that issue has been
addressed
reported in the book.
It is in the book.
हाँ. अच्छा, आप पूछ लें फिर जवाब. हाँ जी.
मेरा सवाल है जी अकीला साहिबा से.
जी. आप अपना तारुफ तो कराएं. सॉरी. आप अपना तारुफ तो करा दें.
जी. मैं जी जनरल मोहम्मद अफजल मुजफ्फर is my name.
जी.
My question is that on many occasions you have made a mention of Rauf Farman Ali to be complicit on many accounts. Have you read the Hamoud Rahman Commission report in which each of these questions has been discussed, corroborated, and he has been exonerated on all these aspects, whether these were those forces, whether it was the intellectuals' killings, whether it was anything which you have mentioned. And secondly, are you aware that whilst he was the advisor to the governor of East Pakistan, what authority did he yield to overcome the problems which were faced in East Pakistan? He has mentioned that he has been advising. A man resigns when he is in a position of authority. Like General Niazi, he could have resigned if he had not agreed. Like Sahibzada Yaqub resigned when he thought it was not correct. It was Malik he should have resigned if he had not accepted. He was an advisor.
शुक्रिया. चलिए, थैंक यू. जवाद साहब को दें और उसके बाद बिल्कुल आप पे कंक्लूड करेंगे. हाँ.
राजिश साहब
मुझे जी
मैं दो एक ऑब्जर्वेशंस देना चाह रहा हूँ. मुझे एक दफ़ा मुख्तार मसूद साहब ने ये बतलाया था अपना ज़ाती एक एक्सपीरियंस जो फेडरल सेक्रेटरी रिटायर हुए थे, कि 1961 में वो प्लानिंग कमीशन के मेंबर थे और एक गवर्नर्स कॉन्फ्रेंस, एक फोरम होता था, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर प्रेजाइड करते थे, गवर्नर्स एंड फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर्स ऑफ बोथ द प्रोविंसेस ईस्ट एंड वेस्ट। तो मैं चंद एक ईस्ट पाकिस्तान के प्रोजेक्ट थे उनके बारे में बड़ा वेहेमेंटली वो कर रहा था, उसके लिए एडवोकेसी। तो जब लंच ब्रेक हुआ तो शोएब साहब मुझे एक तरफ ले गए और उन्होंने कहा, यंग मैन, व्हाई यू सो इमोशनल अबाउट द प्रोविंस विच इज़ नॉट गोइंग टू रिमेन विद अस टू लॉन्ग। 1961. Then
so it was a separation foretold.
Then गौहर अल्ताफ गौहर साहब की किताब में लिखा है कि जब अयूब खान साहब ने ढाका में नेशनल असेंबली की बिल्डिंग का इफ्तिताह किया तो उन्होंने उनसे ये कहा, चलिए इनके पास अपनी असेंबली की कोई बिल्डिंग तो होगी। और एमएम अहमद साहब के पास एक शॉर्ट एनालिसिस हुआ था, करके रखा हुआ था कि हमें फ़ायदे और नुकसानात क्या क्या हैं। और चौथा कमेंट, और वो सारे इस फेवर में थे कि वो अलहदा हो जाएं तो हमारी नैया।
हाँ, माइक को करीब ही रखे रहिए। हाँ।
और चौथा ये कि अयूब खान ने, ये कहीं लिखा हुआ है, मुझे एग्जैक्ट रेफरेंस नहीं पता, कहीं मुझे बताया गया कि अपनी कैबिनेट के एक वेस्ट पाकिस्तानी मिनिस्टर से कहा था कि उसी कैबिनेट के एक बंगाली वजीर से बातचीत शुरू करें कि हम कैसे अच्छी तरह से अलहदा हो सकते।
शुक्रिया।
और एक और चीज़ मैं कहना चाहूँगा,
गुंजाइश नहीं है। हाँ,
एक और चीज़, एक और बहुत ज़रूरी कमेंट।
हाँ,
हुसैन शहीद सोहरवर्दी बहुत बीमार थे, शेख मुजीबुर रहमान उनके पाँव दबा रहे थे कराची में। तो उन्होंने बंगाली में कहा कि बाबू अब ये वक्त नहीं आ गया कि हम वन मैन वन वोट की बात करें। तो उन्होंने कहा, बड़ी अपने तमाम कुव्वत को मुज्तमा करके ही किक्ड हिम, कि वो दूर जाके गिरे। तो उन्होंने ये उस पर कहा कि जब बहुत गुस्से में, कि हमने इतनी मुश्किल से इतने साल लगा के ये पैरिटी का प्रिंसिपल मनवाया है और तुम्हें मालूम नहीं है कि लॉन्गर रन में वेस्ट पाकिस्तान की पॉपुलेशन हमसे ज़्यादा बढ़ जाएगी, जब क्या करोगे। तो ये जो काम किया था याया खान ने कि वन मैन वन वोट किया।
हाँ, तो चले, हाँ नहीं वो बात हो गई। एक कंक्लूडिंग। जी बिल्कुल, आप उनको, अच्छा, अरे
जी
चले, हाँ चले।
सिर्फ एक सवाल है, किताब तो मैंने पढ़ी नहीं है, क्या इस किताब में ये लिखा हुआ है कि फॉल ऑफ ढाका से 3 दिन पहले मोहतरम जनाब मुशायरे की सदारत फरमा रहे थे?
क्या ये कह रहे हैं कि फॉल ऑफ ढाका से 3 दिन पहले उन्होंने मुशायरे की सदारत की थी। चले, दैट इज़ एन असाइड। आप बताइए।
सुलेमान हसन, आई एम अ सर्जन एट द आगा खान।
आपकी बात समझ में नहीं आ रही। हाँ,
मेरा नाम सुलेमान हसन है, सर्जन। There is one basic question. The military was in power. Yahya Khan was president. He decided to hold an election, a free and fair election, they say. Was it not his responsibility to hand over power? And regardless of what Bhutto did or Mujib did, was it not his responsibility? Does any book answer that? I have not read this book.
शुक्रिया। ये सवाल भी है, बहुत से और सवाल भी हैं, बहुत से और सवाल जो हैं हाथ भी खड़े हैं।
एक सवाल है सर,
मुझे, मैं क्या करूं?
2 मिनट।
नहीं, वक्त नहीं है। क्या ऑर्गेनाइजर्स हमें अगला सेशन दे रहे हैं? नहीं दे रहे? क्यों नहीं दे रहे भाई? तो
एक सवाल सर सिर्फ।
आप लेट मी जस्ट कंक्लूड। मैंने शुरू में ये कहा था कि ये बहुत ही मुश्किल सब्जेक्ट है, बहुत ही इमोटिव इशू है। इट इज़ पार्ट ऑफ आवर लिविंग मेमोरी। ऑल ऑफ अस हैव बीन इन्वॉल्व्ड, ऑल ऑफ अस हैव सफर्ड द पेन ऑफ दैट सेपरेशन एंड दैट ट्रेजेडी। और असल सवाल जो था वो तो मैं पूछ ही नहीं पाया। असल सवाल ये है कि उस सेपरेशन का पाकिस्तान पे क्या असर पड़ा है, उसकी मोरालिटी पर, उसकी पॉलिटिक्स पर, उसकी सेंस ऑफ डायरेक्शन पे। पाकिस्तान बांग्लादेश बनने के बाद कहाँ खड़ा है, क्या चीज़ें तब्दील हुई हैं, तो उस सवाल का जवाब हम देख नहीं सके। आप क्या खात्मे का ऐलान कर रही हैं? मुझे करने दें। तो लेट अस टेक दीज क्वेश्चंस। ये वो चीज़ें हैं जिन पे हमें संजीदगी से गौर करना चाहिए। हमें ये किताब भी पढ़नी चाहिए, दूसरी किताबें भी पढ़नी चाहिए, and we have to come to terms with the loss of East Pakistan somehow. शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत.
The book is available at the back of the hall, and at the next session in this room is Afghanistan, Pakistan, Illusions and Realities. Najmuddin Sheikh in conversation with Ahmad Rashid. Thank you. Thank you.